Just got a haircut the other day. Said, you look just like Grandma.
That's ultimately that.
Okay, we are live.
I was very honored, just so you know.
All right, good morning, everybody. It is 11 o'clock. I just felt like a radio host there for a second. I guess I do have a face for radio. It is 11:01 and it's December 2nd. This is the Housing Committee of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency. And we'll call the meeting to order. We do have Jerry Dietz, member of the committee, who's been excused, and Dux Nguyen, who is on his way. And so we have really two items on the agenda: the housing strategy discussion and timing for future meetings. So as it relates to the housing strategy discussion, I'll turn it over both to David and Kelly to lead that part of the agenda.
So, okay, great. So the first component of this discussion is the CDBG grant application. So we put in for $50,000. We're actually on an agenda recommended for approval on Thursday. So that's
Tuned.
good news. It's not common that their recommendations for approval don't turn into approvals, but not final till the last vote is cast. So we should know soon on that. Obviously, that makes a difference in the budget for the project, and consequently, I think in the scope of the project. The CDBG funding specifically needs to go towards the components of the project that focus on affordable housing. If that didn't come in, we would certainly be looking for other sources of funds to do a lot of that work, but it might not all be the same.
Okay.
I think it's fantastic that the IDA is contributing the majority of the budget for this, and where we go from there is kind of process wise. We were thinking that the IDA would contribute those funds directly to the county planning department's budget, which we would then only need to have one contract with the consultant and a contract with the IDA and county planning, rather than, Kelly and I talked about, we could have separate contracts for different parts of the grant. We could have a consultant contract directly with the IDA instead of with the planning department. But I think it makes the most sense to have county planning and sustainability manage the consultant, and then involve the IDA as funder, where we would be reporting back throughout the year. The CDBG grant is a 12-month grant. So that scope of work needs to be completed within a year of award announcement, which is actually more like 9 months, as it takes months to actually get the contract with the state set up after you receive the award. It's, I would say, a good pace. It will keep us
On our toes.
keep us moving forward. But it's enough time to do the work, and I think it's good to have that pressure to not delay, keep things rolling.
So I think with that being said, we would look for a motion from this committee to bring to the full board to approve moving the funds that are designated for this study from the IDA account to the county planning and sustainability.
And Doug, so just to get you up to speed for a second, David's suggesting that we have one contract with the consultant that would be from county planning to the consultant, and then that we would have a contractual relationship with IDA back to county planning to fund and provide those services as a funder. Would anyone like to make that motion?
Make the motion.
Mel, seconded by Duxon. All those in favor? Okay. So that will move IDA funds to the county, authorize you guys to enter into you guys as the IDA, to enter into a relationship with the county.
Yes.
And when will that come to the full idea? Do they have another? meeting?
Oh, we can bring it tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll include it in we have another addition from the finance committee meeting this morning, so we'll just tack this on there as well.
Great.
The next steps with that will be, as soon as we're awarded, we can then have an RFP for a consultant. And I will want that to move fairly quickly. Included in your packet was kind of some draft scope documentation that will be expanded into a full RFP. And since it's coming from the county template, that it will fit. But I would like to get your feedback both on what was provided, so I can adjust it if needed before that turns into a full RFP, and also on the process. With the IDA as a funder, obviously, you're an important stakeholder in this, but I think it would be good to have kind of a larger, broader, more representative group that does the consultant selection when we get responses from the RFP. But I wanted to run that by you all as, major contributors, how you feel about pulling together a larger group. And also, as we work through the project, having a kind of a steering committee of professionals that's broader than that can help field questions and keep the process on track.
So 2 questions at hand. One is the RFP selection committee, and then the next would be a maybe more focused steering committee.
Yeah.
To help guide the work in the moment. Okay. So we start with RFP selection committee thoughts. Do you have thoughts, David?
I do. So
How'd I know?
Been a very productive meeting. That's right.
yeah. Obviously, we want to make sure that the IDA and IAED continue to be involved. So I was hoping that we could have Kelly continue. I want to make sure that we have a group that includes ESS and COFA, includes some representation of infrastructure. So I was thinking, we haven't approached anyone yet, but ideas of things to think about, someone like Dave Herrick or someone from Bolton Point. Especially as we look at the county's development focus area strategy and how we want to have development in different parts of the county, but not just sprawl everywhere. The way that infrastructure impacts those places is really important. For years, we've said that our hamlet should develop, but we haven't actually done a lot of infrastructure that would make that possible. So I think that's important. It would be good to have a realtor involved, a banker, perhaps. I was thinking someone like Johanna would be great to bring housing and banking together as a perspective, but filling that. Someone from the nonprofit sector like NHS. I would love to have Liddy from Human Services Coalition, deals with homelessness and housing, and then representation from DSS. A lot of the bases.
That's a selection committee you were talking about there?
Those are kind of categories I would like to see.
Categories for,
Yeah.
because that's a really large selection committee. I just think
Yeah.
we deal with a lot of RFPs. I don't know if people would have time to look at multiple RFPs. That's where it breaks down typically.
Yeah.
It's a matter of who's interested and who has time of the group would make sense to me.
And then thoughts on I guess maybe we don't separate the question, but thoughts on steering committee?
And I want to make sure that we have assessment involved.
Yes.
I think all those other groups are good for steering committee, and I want to make sure that county assessment particularly on the steering committee side, I want to make sure that when the strategy is complete, that it's trackable with assessment data. One of the things that was a challenge, when I was with the county previously, I did the first snapshot that was, hey, we have the strategy, we're going to track it. And then it was like, oh, you actually can't track all of these things very easily that we said we wanted to track with the data we have. I think that's important. And they have a pulse on things in a way that we can't get because they have all these informal conversations that don't produce data that they can share. But I think they're a useful resource there.
Is there a need to have a planner from an outlying area, or I'm thinking, just thinking of the planners that are out there, so, somewhere in a location that may be prime for the next phase of development?
Yeah, I think that would be great to have someone like Ray.
From Dryden.
And I would say John from Lansing, but he's leaving.
My heart is sad. I think John did an excellent job out there.
I think Ray from Dryden would be good.
Yeah.
He'd be willing.
And that brings up their, we'll have a main kind of client committee, but this is also something that will come to the planning advisory board that has some of representation with the town of Ithaca and other groups. It would be something we bring to this group, obviously, but could also come to the full IDA, and it's going to be coming to HED and county legislature as well. So yeah, lots of opportunities, but I want to make sure, when we think about what things do we bring the consultant to versus me and our county staff reporting to, I want to make sure we have a clear group there. So Ray would be great.
What's the county's process for appointments to the groups? Is it a formal arrangement, or is it something that can be done at the staff level, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's flexible. Sometimes we would have something like this, a resolution to HED that they could appoint, but I think
Staff
can do it as well.
Just didn't want to get lost in a
Yeah.
three process or something.
We move very quickly.
I know.
We meet more than once a month. No, typically, I think typically the county administrator or department head would appoint the RFP review committees unless it was a specific request of the legislature to have RFP for something for their specific requests.
To Nelson's point, how large are they typically?
I mean, RFP research committees can be everywhere from like 3 to 20 people. It's just how big whoever's leading that wants to wrangle and create a spreadsheet with tabs that are, it really depends. I think we've seen them all over the place.
Yeah, but Nels is right. It can be unwieldy to have just to get people to a meeting. I think is the hardest part. We always have difficulty with the POC for the Community Housing Development Fund. It's difficult to schedule because lots of people who are involved in lots of important meetings that all overlap.
I hear you wanting all this. I mean, you could have tiers where people score on a spreadsheet and don't necessarily show up at a meeting. But I understand why you want this diverse list of people.
Yeah. Does anybody have, I guess, and from this committee have any objection to what David is proposing?
I'd recommend you work through the administrator and recommend a great membership. Would work.
Okay. Are there any additional suggestions that I haven't included that you would want to make sure we do include?
I personally would like to see an elected official on here. Some
Typical.
got to advocate for your constituent group. But again, I would be open to a town supervisor, a town board member, a city person, a county person. But I do think that there needs to be
That representation.
that representation, even though many on this position represent the interests of those entities. I think it's important.
I think this is probably captured by either Johanna or Kelly or other people, but the whole point is to build more housing, right? So someone who really knows, someone who would, under certain circumstances, build a townhouse, but can't for various reasons. Potential, what do they call them? Incremental development people, incremental people.
Yeah, like Joe Lovejoy in Lansing, he
Gotcha.
wants to do all of these creative ways to achieve more housing. He could be someone that we reach out to or include. He's a developer in Lansing. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, specifically in Dryden, he has a proposal, but there's a sewer connectivity capacity issue that is sort of stalling momentum to do, nice,
Yeah.
Nice small sort of project. That would be an interesting perspective. I always appreciate Jeremy at Cornell. I think he's excellent as it relates to the finance and the real estate side of things. But again, I would trust you all to make the determination. I'm just throwing out.
Yeah.
I do think having some Cornell cooperation connection potentially would be beneficial.
Yeah, and if Jeremy can't do it, Kristen on his team could be a great resource as well.
I definitely think we, in this process, will want to have some kind of developer forum. Although my experience has been sometimes developers are not willing to talk a lot in a room with a lot of other developers. So ways to get that feedback will be important.
I think it's important too to understand developer scale. And there are big developers that have a much different agenda and path forward than I think what we see a lot of times too in our community. A lot is noticed by the big projects, right? But there's these little infills that are happening by people that are really sort of betting it all on that one project, recouping some of their investment and then betting it all again on the next one. So making sure we have a diverse, that we're not just talking to the behemoth developers or the institutional developers. And I think the perspective too of the not-for-profit developer, through INHS would be an interesting one to get. Because it's not like a one-size-fits-all designation.
Right.
For sure.
I wonder if there's a way to structure this so that people get involved in it at a point where it makes sense for them. They're interested enough. I mean, they probably aren't interested in some of the aspects of it, right? But then they're going to be intensely interested in some other aspects. I don't know if there's a way to, or maybe, I don't know, it just seems like it's a pretty unwieldy number where we've identified like a dozen or something. That's not a feasible group to really work.
To drive the whole
through private,
Right.
So
to be
break it up somehow and bring them in at the right time, maybe early and then at some other point where they drop in, or it's based on their interests, maybe. If you don't show up at the meeting or you don't read the material, then, you're obviously not going to contribute much.
Yeah, I think we've probably shifted from the selection and steering committee to interested parties identifying.
How do we pull them in?
How do we pull people in?
Draft, shape it, review an early draft or something, maybe too. Could be another way to do it.
Yeah, so I will say the last strategy we had, it was a multi-year process that started with conditions and needs assessment that was published in 2016, and then the strategy was next year, and part of that was like this huge forum that I don't see us going in that direction of having like one very large event, but I do think it's very important for something that has this time scale of a 10-year strategy that we're making a lot of smaller opportunities for engagement with stakeholders, with the community generally. And I think that's going to be a part of the project design that we'll want to collaborate closely with the consultant on. And in kind of conversations I've had thinking about the scope, there may be some role for that to not be all consultant and a lot of that to be staff driven. But I want to make sure that there's asynchronous things, you know, that we're having polls online and things like that for people who don't have time to come to a meeting, that we're providing information and that we're reaching out to the whole variety of, you know, neighborhood groups, developers at different levels, as well as kind of the players that are involved in all of these things that have the experience and technical knowledge.
I would like to see personally, and I don't know how we would structure this, but like recommendation, implementation, and I'm just gonna say like 3 words here, but like validation or verification, but that there's significant either buy-in or agreement on the concrete recommendations by those that are likely to play a role in their implementation. And so I don't know if it's a, you know, hey, we have this issue and we're thinking about these 2 recommendations. How do we try to generate that? I think maybe taking a play out of our economic strategy this past year, making sure that we align the implementors with the actual strategy. And I think that must be a priority for the consultant.
Yes,
It
because that
cannot
can
just,
stop the whole.
that'll stop, it'll literally waste all this money and all of your time if we don't have some sort of buy. Not everybody has to agree, but there has to be enough agreement that people are willing to try something, right? So, and again, just to reiterate, I hope we're not restating the problem. Because I think we can look at the housing snapshot and understand what the problem is.
Yeah.
Right. And we want to address it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that is really important that we're identifying actions that we can take in 1, 3, 5-year time span that we hope will make changes to production. I do think that is the time scale that we have to, you know, when we were looking at the previous strategy, mostly looked at what do we need and not so much at how do we get it. I think now when we've looked at, we had the strategy where we said what we need, some things we got, the things that work in the market, some things we didn't get. How can we get more of what works in the market? What changes do we need to make? How do we need to be more proactive to get there? And I do think that takes saying this group can do these, that group can do these. And then the more buy-in we have from the groups that we're saying, if you do this, it would help, the better. Yeah, they're actually going to do it. There is some value in saying like, it would really help if municipalities looked at zoning and, you know, looked at reducing parking requirements or looked at reducing lot sizes where we want to have development, things like that. Even before there's buy-in, it's useful to say that, but it's a lot more useful when you have a group that says, we're gonna go and work on this and make those changes. But I think there is buy-in on a lot of these things.
Wondering whether we can push the consultant to provide like implementation or strategy choices, then people can weigh in on, rather than here's our recommendation.
Yeah.
And then there's only one recommendation. Or maybe it's kind of like, you know, bold, you know, moderate, you know, incremental changes or something.
Great idea.
Something that would kind of give some choices for people. If we have this group of, you know, stakeholders that they can kind of chew on a little bit.
Yeah.
Say like this one better than that one, or this one's gonna have more impact. And it might require the city, county, or others to really rethink their role, you know, and what they're doing.
Right, right. For sure, that would be great, but it's never gonna happen.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It's on this.
Yeah,
one.
right. Realistic too.
I do think if there's opportunity to, I know there's a lot of debate and, Tracy, you're one that brings this to the forefront often around incentives.
Mhm.
And I appreciate sort of the community sentiment and challenging and checking the incentives that are provided. But are there recommendations to improve or rethink the way that we're doing some of those incentives to drive a better result? I don't know what that is, but just sort of an open-ended question.
I could offer some thoughts that I think I've already said. When a developer applies for an IDA, abatement, look at their track record. Don't just sort of say, oh, this is a developer. Some are much better than others in getting the job done. Some are much worse. Note that both, by the way, there have been 2 articles in the press recently criticizing the IDA, you might say, and both revolve around the same developer. And I think he had a track record before he got any IDA support. Let's see, there was a second thing now. Oh, yes, the IDA should do some research on the accuracy of the numbers. Maybe I don't exactly mean accuracy of the numbers that are presented, but like, is this a company that has huge capital anyway? Then, why assist them? On the other hand, if it truly is margin, they'll say it's marginal, even if it isn't. Okay, finally, another thought that I was having when there was this discussion of what should be, in the RFP. Try to get information about what the jobs are. And that's not always easy because the census mostly tells you what the residents and their housing situation. But I mean, we know that a lot of the people who work especially in the city, live far, far away. And I think it would be helpful if we knew there are, like 1,000 store clerks making, not nearly a living wage. There are 500, I don't know what, bank tellers or something like that. And kind of try to come up with some sort of what is the housing need based on, to some extent, on jobs rather than on residents who are currently living in the city or in the county.
Those are all good points. I appreciate the contribution. Mouse?
A little bit worried that an analysis of the CTAP incentives is going to take a large chunk of this and steer it towards that issue. It almost seems like a separate issue that should be investigated in my mind, rather than part of a larger housing strategy for the county, because it's kind of specific to a couple projects that come, 2 projects a year, maybe at most.
I would love to look at incentives outside of that.
Okay, well, that's okay. So that would be maybe a recommendation to explore what else can IDAs do or other entities.
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily.
But focusing on the CTAP specifically is going to take a lot of effort to really think through that issue. I think if we're going to reexamine those incentives.
Yeah, so
in detail.
I was not coming from that standpoint. That is its own animal. And I think that lives in the city and IDA. But are there things that we can be doing in other parts of the community that we haven't done before historically, other than solar, that we could actually move the needle?
Okay.
This is the housing.
Well, and some of that from a strategy perspective, maybe five other counties have done this. The task is investigate
100%.
More.
Yeah.
if the IDA wants to take that route or,
Right.
I'm not sure that the strategy will fully flesh out all of the various things that could be done, but can help us focus on which of them we continue to work on.
I did wonder about the scope on one point as it relates to the IDA though, which might get rid of some of these issues.
Yeah.
Is I think the IDA is having some questions, wondering whether market rate projects are attainable and pencil out. And this study could, it's pretty much focused on incomes, below market projects. But it could look at that question, what is attainable in the market under the current circumstances? Or if the interest rates go down, what happens? They go up, those kind of things. So you have a tool when you're looking at projects to say, is this gonna lease up or not? With reason, in reason.
Yeah,
I think that could be valuable for the IDA to have that tool to give a little bit of guidance.
Yeah,
That's truly a market rate kind of a, analysis though.
and assuming we get the CDBG funding, my goal is that the CDBG funding pays for most of the below market rate side, and then the IDA funding pays for the market rate and the knitting together of those.
Okay, I wasn't sure the market rate was really going to be part of this. So.
I think it needs to be, and I think that was one of the challenges with the last strategy is we laid out targets for a lot of important parts of the housing market, but we did not have any targets for market rate. And so when we track projects and we say, oh, we're way behind the units that we said we want, we didn't have a metric for market rate. We built a lot of market rate, and that's good. We know that building market rate does help other segments. But there was no, we predict this amount of need for market rate. They're kind of on their own. And it wasn't something that we were tracking in the snapshots other than, what's the total number? We didn't have information for developers, like what kind of absorption can you expect? How much market is there at different price points? So I hope that we can focus on that.
The downtown market study from 15 years ago was used by developers to justify bank loans and equity investments. So that was helpful in that regard to projects.
Yeah. I think that will continue to be helpful. And really it is all a spectrum. And the more we can consider the market as a whole, I think the better.
I'm happy to see regulatory analysis, because I know we talked about this when we were first going through criteria. Regulatory analysis still on the scope list, which is good because I hear about that all the time, not just through the approval process, but then at the building department or what the city is the building department and what they enforce or don't enforce with regard to state code. Like there are all these I hear about, and I feel powerless because council doesn't tell the building department what to enforce, but that these are things that either make it too expensive to build or maintain, or will lock an old building. Like I can't remember the details, but something about some plumbing thing was preventing someone from putting laundry in their apartments, and that is now for young people like a must-have. And so now they can't upgrade these apartments because of this state code thing, and little things like that, I think are inhibitors.
Flood regs are going to start to have a big impact in the city flats.
Giant one, yes.
Yeah, I think it's useful to get into, there's the regulatory side and then there's the implementation of that. How does it actually hit the ground with staff in terms of how the communication happens, what things are the focus? In one of this lecture series that we've been having, someone described what their project ran into in a municipality as hitting a tangle, not a roadblock, just a tangle of like, you can't even figure out what it is, and it just kind of slows things down and you maybe get through it eventually, but it is a barrier.
Well, let's look at manufactured homes as a option. Like, we've seen quite a bit of improvement in that
Mhm.
product type. Where historically it's kind of been like a bad word to say, but now I feel like
It's becoming more.
it's becoming
much more
more
prevalent.
affordable.
Mhm.
And a viable option. I know that there's work in the county that's being done by others to kind of advance that initiative.
Yeah, I do think that that is an important component of our housing market. I think one of the things that's really interesting statewide is that it's now illegal to treat a manufactured home on a permanent foundation any different than stick built. So it's just a single family house. And it's a way that we can get more single family houses affordably, but there isn't a lot that we need to do other than acknowledge that it has to be treated that way by zoning. I think it is something that the state is working on, that's right. I'd love to see more. There's a great grant program out right now that can give a lot of money for construction of for sale, single family manufactured homes, but you need to have 10 lots ready to receive them in a municipality that passes some resolutions that they'll accept and kind of fast track that. And it's really designed for places like Syracuse that have, 400 lots in a land bank. But it's a great program that we weren't able to put in an application in because nobody has 10 lots. It's a low barrier, but it's still one that we don't have. So how can we facilitate that?
So the other question is, you talked about interested parties, the health department, environmental health,
Mhm.
as it relates to septic and sewer and water.
Especially home
Especially,
regulation,
yeah, especially if it's in, our rural areas or things like that. I think one of the challenges you see is just the pure size of lot that you need with some of these regulations. Makes it prohibitive because everybody thinks their land is worth $1 bajillion an acre,
Yeah.
because some solar company will pay that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of technology now that can do on-site. There's single home membrane filtration systems, but it kind of has to be, it's more expensive, obviously, but if it allowed you to do smaller lots in a cluster, it requires health departments. Every New York's health department kind of is pretty independent and has to approve things like that individually. So I think engaging them would be a great idea.
Flooding.
To see more of a home in the floodplain. Yeah,
You live there.
Yeah.
There was a question I had on the scope as well, that the housing conditions assessment is kind of different from all the rest of it. It seems to be like actually preparing a draft grant application, a baseline for somebody to apply for a rehab program or something like that.
Yes.
Is that
So
focused on that?
both conditions and needs assessment are prerequisites for CDBG applications. Right now, I think municipalities are individually doing those, which means if you don't have one, you can't apply for like a rehab grant until you. So for example, I worked for Danby. It went through multiple planners of CJ Randall applied for money to do conditions and someone else implemented that. And then when I was the planner, I applied for the first grant to do rehab, and now I think they're on their third or fourth. Yeah, and it's flowing, but it doesn't cost a lot more. Most of the money in that is kind of in the mobilization and the getting started. So if we can do it countywide, or countywide for municipalities that qualify for it, that was one question I think I had for you early on, is would it make sense to do it in the city when you're an entitlement community, you're not going through that same grant application process?
I said no, probably not. But that seems like it's almost a different skill set from what we're asking unless you have a consultant team that has that piece along with the analysis piece. You might, and maybe there's a way to say it's an option to bid. I don't want to like rule somebody out because they don't have people to go out in the field to do housing condition surveys.
Yeah,
It seems like that could be a challenge or an obstacle to get as many applicants.
I do think I think that's a fantastic point, and we'll go into how we structure the RFP. If at 120,000, it's a substantial scale budget that could allow some partnering, but I'm not against the idea of allowing proposals on individual components that would allow us to mix and match and have someone who does a lot of that conditions and needs assessment and maybe is close and can mobilize the personnel easily to do that.
Right.
And then
If you're driving from Albany, you're going to add extra costs than
Right.
somebody, yeah.
right.
Was it a view to try to get a conditions assessment of the entire county's housing stock outside the city? Or were you looking at 2 or 4 communities that have an interest in this?
To be usable in grant application, you don't have to analyze every property. It has to be kind of you can do a survey methodology that you randomly select a certain amount.
Okay.
My goal was that it would be applicable to all of the municipalities outside of the city. But I do think it'd be worthwhile before we sign a contract to have more conversations with all of those groups and make sure that they want it. Because I will say, I have talked to one municipality who said, we have a budget. We don't need CDBG funds. They're too difficult to work with. We wouldn't go after that.
Some wisdom there. That was in some level. Yeah, because that could be just a big chunk of the workflow, and I want to reserve it for more interesting things to read. You can see it. It'd be useful too.
Comments on the scope, questions, concerns?
You mentioned this already, I think, or it's written in here that, you're trying to look at what is feasible under current and projected conditions. And I like that concept that there's kind of a metric that people can apply because things change. I mean, housing is very interest rate influenced. So if the rate drops 2 points, that makes the whole category of things feasible and vice versa, of course. So I think that's really helpful to have if we can get it to a level that makes sense. It's not too generalized. It's great to have some tool that way and be able to analyze things in a world where an interest rate is quite different from.
And then to go along with that, we had just come up with kind of a draft work plan to follow up from the previous meeting that we had, and thought that could kind of just go along with the scope of work with how the needs and survey reflect on incentives and priorities of just to keep in line with the goals of both the survey and any housing policy incentives and direction as that goes. There's a lot on there. And obviously it won't pertain to everything with the survey.
Okay.
It's just ideas that everyone came up with at our last housing committee meeting. David and I can go through the list of everyone for this RFP selection committee and kind of come up with a game plan for outreach for them. We can come up with a more concrete list of those names and run it by this committee. if that makes
I think we
sense.
just delegated it back to you guys.
If does that make sense?
Great with me, move
Yeah,
quicker,
as long as you're comfortable with that.
as long as you're both comfortable with it, I think, right? You have the IDA and county kind of represented on that. Makes sense to me.
Everything's been decided?
Everything's done.
Okay, good. We stand adjourned yet?
Mark's been new. No.
I had just said how we have the draft work plan, which was follow-up from the last committee meeting, and wanting to keep that kind of in line with what the goals of the survey are and incentives on the IDA side of things. And then David and I can kind of go through the individuals and ideas for the RFP selection committee and kind of come up with a more concrete list of targeted outreach for that and run it by this committee before we do that, if that's the will of the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I would be also fine to trust your two's judgment.
Okay.
And not need to,
Bring it back if you decide you need to bring it back.
if you decide you need to bring it back for conversation, because you can't, if you guys can't play nice.
Sure.
Call the meeting for,
We're great at conflict
I tell you
resolution.
what.
I did have one follow-up from the meeting though before, because we were talking about for-profit developers who are doing affordable housing, and, you know, there's kind of discussion about, does there need to be a management background search, or how do you make sure that they're meeting what they committed to originally? And I just want to share with you the kind of market study that, a summary of the market study that tax credit applications do, whether you're for-profit, not for-profit. And so this is a page, I got enough for everybody, so don't worry. On the front is the summary market study for 210 Hancock. So you can see how they break out their categories of income bands for the project. Don't look on the other side because that's a different project I was going to tell you about. But it just shows like this is the 14 units, at 50% AMI, for example, for one bedroom. They're breaking it down. They're taking that and transforming it into a kind of a pro forma for their project based on those income bands. They asked the state for money based on this kind of a mix. And then we heard Rick Manzardo say, yeah, well, you could hold us to keeping to meet these income bands. That would be a legitimate question to ask within reason. I mean, you're trying to fill up the units, of course.
Right.
But what so that's 210 Hancock, and they pretty well met theirs. They had trouble filling up the 100% ones where they have a not applicable, that's a market rate unit.
It's 210 Hancock.
It's the old
Science Center?
Yeah, written by the Science Center.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
The multifamily project
Yes.
that INHS had.
yes.
So they pretty well met this. They had trouble filling up their market rate because people didn't perceive INHS as having market rate units. And I think they ended up running that at 80 or 90%. But overall, they were able to match up their project with those income bands. The one kicker is if you have a housing choice voucher, they can fit into any band that's eligible under the housing choice voucher program. So if you come forward and you have a low income, but you have a housing choice voucher, you could rent an 80% AMI unit, I think, is that way I understand it. So, so that's not really factored into this analysis that well, but that's an example of 210 Hancock where it worked out to match up. If you turn the page over, it's the Sterry. They similarly had a market study that came up with conclusions about what the income bands should be when they asked the state for funding. And you can see the mix. There's a lot of 60% AMIs there. They don't have a lot of 60% AMIs as tenants. So they went astray from that. They moved down in the income bands dramatically in terms of occupancy. And that's where I think the agents, IDA could ask about, you're telling us that this is going to be the mix, and then you changed it, so to speak, could be an issue of whether they could have good reasons. There could be, reasonable reasons why they couldn't meet those, but it's a way to provide some certainty about, is this truly a mixed income project, or is it going to be all in one, probably on one income band or something? So I think that's information question you could ask about applicants, what they're doing. It's part of their formal application to the state. It's not, you know, it's not exclusive information particularly or anything. And they're required to do a market study for their location of their proposed project. And submit that as part of their application package. So when you see projects, you know, the one INHS is doing on West State Street, they're gonna have another study like this. They're gonna come up with another mix. And then they're gonna try to match that when they fill up the units. And they're showing the state that there is enough demand for those units. That's the other part of this is they've already analyzed through their market study whether they can meet, fill these units up based on what they know about the market.
And then do they need to provide this as follow-up throughout?
It's done. Once it's in, it's done.
Okay.
And so there's
Because
no.
that would be great.
No, they could, no, they could provide that. That's what I'm
Right.
saying. They could say, well, what did you add? Well, and that way. And if you changed it on us, then maybe that impacts your pilot or something. I
Mhm.
mean, there could be a way to do that. There's
So-
some nuance that's needed because it's, you know, it's a little rough, but
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to have some level of
ability.
deviation,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't want to.
The state views it as a cap, right? Like when you say an 80% unit, it's, you aren't allowed to rent it to someone who makes more than 80%, but the
Correct.
state would be happy if you rent it to someone who makes 30% or 50% or.
They have allowed that for sure, right?
Yeah.
But then your financing plan starts to fall apart pretty soon, right? Because you don't have enough money to maintain the building or hire staff or whatever it is. Yeah. So,
Well, I mean, also there's benefit to having a diversity of AMIs
Yes.
within a project,
so
as I think we've seen and we've heard from the community. But it's interesting that it's viewed as a cap, right? Like this really is, you can have no more than 10 units at 80%, not you must have 10 units at 80%.
right. Mhm. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it might be a useful piece of information when you look at projects that fall into that for-profit, affordable category seeking pilot support.
Obviously, they have the incentive to be at the top of those unless you're getting vouchers involved, in which case they
Yeah.
get the full amount regardless of the income of the tenant.
Right. Well, I mean, they're getting more money from the state when they show lower incomes residency. So there could be an argument that you know, from a developer's point of view, you don't want to push it so far up the scale that you're not going to fill it up.
Right.
They have a kind of a general standard that they say to be eligible for state tax credits, your, what do they call it? Like your capture rate of households in that income and can't has to be no greater than 10%. And most of these projects are like 2% or something. So you have to capture 2% of the pool of people they say would be financially incentive for them to rent that 2-bedroom unit at $1,400 because that group is already paying more than $1,400, you know, in the current market. So then they kind of quantify that and say your capture rate that you assume can't be higher than 10% to be eligible for tax credits. And these were, you know, INHS, I think even had a number on there. So they having they were really low on their capture rate. I don't see it on this page. They were, you know, they knew they were going to fill it up.
So do you think that it would be valuable to IDA projects to ask for this to be returned after initial lease up? To understand the mix based in the comparison to their presented projections?
Yeah, well, the thought was somehow that if somebody deviates dramatically from their original income band projection, that should impact the way that the project is analyzed and the pilot could be adjusted. They're selling one thing, but they're delivering something different, I guess is the question.
Right.
Sometimes that's going to be perfectly okay, and other times it's going to be, wait a second. we have a lot of adverse impacts around this area due to this change that was made in a project. You pitched it as one way. So it's a way to provide some certainty about that AMI mix. Yes, and it could be a clawback, or I guess would be one, an opening.
Perfectly timed, Dyson.
Opening for a clawback.
Objection was just noted. It was perfectly timed. I'm just kidding. I know what I'm kidding.
So they would submit this with their application.
Their funding application to the state. Yeah,
Right.
it could be to the IDA too. I mean, I think they probably do provide some of that information in what they submit to the IDA.
And then, as a follow-up, just thinking out loud for like a timing to check in on this, 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of incentive to lease up in a reasonable time period because getting more funding from developers is tied to that in the state. So, yeah, after a year, a stabilized kind of program.
So would there be benefit before we put some teeth to it to kind of
That's right.
test run it and sort of track it and just, ask some projects that this be, for consideration as we try to understand these dynamics, but it doesn't, we wouldn't hold teeth to it.
I think any low-income housing tax credit developer is tracking that income band of their units. So I don't think it's a huge ask to ask them like, hey, where did you end up compared to your application or you, if they're cooperating, I mean, if they want to provide that.
Maybe we could ask Russ if there's a way to incorporate something, like their initial presentation and then sort of a comparative summary chart at maybe 1 year and 3 years. I don't know.
Right.
Those
The
times.
sticking point is if they don't comply with their original plan and you're not happy with that change, what do you do? Because you don't want to take the project, right? Then necessarily that could just create more chaos. So you got to figure out like how do you provide an appropriate incentive to go the right way?
Yeah.
Pay more into the community housing development fund.
Something.
That would be hard, but to say you provided too much single affordable housing.
You need to provide more.
You didn't meet your agreement.
Well, that's why I wonder
Involved in it.
if tracking it for a period,
See,
anecdotally, just sort of looking at it would be helpful on a few projects.
right.
And it'd be useful to, I think, just to understand, and maybe that's,
The goal.
someone who we know will be a good partner like INHS. We could ask them for information about knowing that these are caps, it's always going to be slightly under. And then I guess the question is how much is normal variation in that mix? I know that's always a dance with for sale too of, you can't make more than this amount to qualify, but you have to make like $3 less than that to be bankable. So it's a very narrow band. With crop incentives, I think it's the same with these, like there's an incentive, but there's multiple players. So if, for example, with something like Assyria, they have a management company that their incentive is to fill it because they have a metric that has to be filled at this time.
Right.
And then they have investors that have a different incentive that would like it to be filled as close to the top as possible. Or when you mix in the housing choice vouchers, that's what I think will make the analysis difficult at first. A little bit.
Yeah, well, actually, the equity investors for the tax credits don't want it to make a profit. They want it to break even.
Right.
They
don't want it to operate on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the development company itself would want to make positive. Yeah, it may not lead to anything useful in practice, but it's something that even Rick Manzardo mentions that, hey, it's a legitimate ask the developer to live up to their original framework of how they were going to fill the project up.
Sorry, this isn't super relevant, but who doesn't necessarily benefit from a profitable venture?
So tax credit projects are in fact for the tax credits. And so if we want the project to make a lot of money because that's a taxable event, and then which so they're in it for a very clear reason, they're kind of passive investors. They want the tax credits and they want the depreciation expense back to them, and they don't want to have any problems beyond that.
It's a way for them to reduce their tax exposure
Right.
while doing good.
Yeah, it's an alternative to another use for those funds. Benefits on a different levels.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Other items to be discussed in terms of our sort of work plan, and this maybe came up as it relates to incentives, and maybe this is a discussion we could have with the full IDA. But should we be separately looking at incentive structures or other options in sort of parallel to a housing study?
Well, I will say, the governance committee met, a couple of weeks ago and have a follow-up meeting tomorrow before the board meeting because the enhanced energy incentive policy needed to be reviewed because as of the 31st of this month, it's obsolete. And instead of having it just be an energy enhancement, they're looking at broadening that scope. So for new construction projects that have a greater infrastructure need, providing them more incentive, any extra site remediation that needs to be done, projects that could offer on-site childcare, which for us, we don't get a lot of, manufacturing companies coming here that are going to be employing hundreds of people. So that's most likely not something that is going to be utilized as greatly, but that is an option. Trying to think of other things that were on there, but I would say that that kind of goes along with the review of this so that they're opening the doors for more opportunity to allow for greater incentive for differing projects. If that answers your question.
Ish.
I
guess for me is mostly where should we be looking for additional incentive sites other than downtown Ithaca and Lansing?
Right.
Sure. I mean, I think you see what you get with, look at downtown Ithaca, right?
Right.
It's completely different.
Mhm.
Some would argue.
Right.
But that's fine and fair for debate, but
You have places like Dryden that are growing, and why aren't we incentivizing them more?
so how do we, that's one of the real questions that I'm trying to solve for is how do we look to some of these other communities to say, hey, what role do you want to play in this housing issue? And how can we attract, again, in a balance and fair way for everybody involved to get more? And I just don't know how to do that other than going and asking them. But it's like, what's the ask? What's the mechanism? What do they have to create? Is there some agreement we've got to lawyer up and go back and forth
Right.
with? Or can we just do it?
I think that's an option. And if you ask Russ, he will likely say that.
Yeah.
The idea, you can do what you want. The less restricted, and that's why the enhanced energy and incentive policy is changing. And Russ was really a proponent of make it as broad as you can so that you aren't pigeonholed into these specific things that need to have specific requirements that require ongoing monitoring, et cetera. So I think when it comes to housing, you come up with something and say, this is what we're offering if you do X, Y, and Z. So we want to increase the housing in the county. And deciding what that incentive is going to be. Is the 10-year enhanced incentive enough? I met with one developer who they're like, if we can add 5 more years to our pilot, we can make this 200-unit project happen. So it's one of those things where do you want to put in that extra time, extend the pilot? I mean, that seems to be obviously the biggest incentive.
Is there ways to look to, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of success with the Community Housing Development Fund. Is there a way for other communities that have maybe already engaged in the Community Housing Development Fund? I mean, again, I look at Dryden. Full disclosure, I represent Dryden. You know, is that something that could be, you know, expanded in some way for, you know, if you want incentives and you want to do X rate housing and you don't want to do anything affordable, you can pay into the Community Housing Development Fund and those funds can be turned around and used for projects in that community. Like, is there ways to model that? Is that beneficial?